Hello, I'm your host, Dan Hoffman. Today on Farm Connections, I talked to Chief Engineer Jerry Skifter about the history and agricultural significance of the railroad, and I take a ride on one of his model trains. Kent Thiesse brings us information about conservation, food stamps, and other programs relating to the current Farm Bill. And I have a cup of coffee with Dr. Dean Malvick to talk about plant pathology. All here today on Farm Connections.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections, sponsored by Alcorn Clean Fuel, a farmer-owned cooperative in Claremont, Minnesota, produces ethanol, high-protein livestock feed, and corn oil, and beverage-grade carbon dioxide for resale to benefit its members and their communities. Absolute Energy, a locally owned facility, produces 115 million gallons of ethanol annually, proudly supporting local economies in Iowa and Minnesota. Absolute Energy, adding value to the neighborhood. The Agricultural Utilization Research Institute, collaborating with businesses and entrepreneurs to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products. You can learn more at auri.org. Kahn Tile Supply, Leroy, Minnesota, and New Hampton, Iowa, since 1985, supplying the market with field drain tile products, dual wall, metal culverts, septic systems, PVC, and plumbing supplies.
Well, here we are at a magnificent railroad at the annual Antique Engine and Tractor Show between Spring Valley and Racine, Minnesota. And with me is the Chief Engineer, Jerry Skifter. Jerry, thanks for joining us and being part of Farm Connections. You've got something really special here. There's shade, there's a half-mile of railroad.
Yeah.
How'd this all start?
Well, it started with my dad building one of the first engines that was around in this area, and he never had a track, and when he passed away, then we built the track for out here at the River Show and started running trains out here. And it's a 7.5 inch gauge, 1.5 inch scale railroad, they call it, and it's just kind of a hobby that we started, and but it's been going on since World War II. After World War II, people started building these trains, and in their backyard mostly.
Well, earlier you said there's a little bit of train in everybody.
Yeah.
What exactly did you mean?
Well, we all had electric trains when we were little, you know, and they still do, you know. Little boys still love trains.
So what impact did railroads have to agriculture and southeast Minnesota?
Well, they hauled everything, grain and fuel and food to different towns, all these small towns, you know. That's when they started to prosper, was when the railroad come through, and the ones that didn't get the railroad didn't really prosper that good, and it was just a good thing for the whole country, I think, when the railroads come in.
We have entire towns that actually moved when the railroad decided to go to a different place or bypass their town.
Yeah. In Grand Meadow, I can remember the trains coming through a little bit, but you know, I was pretty young then, and I don't remember the steam at all, but the diesels were coming in then. So, but the railroad was always fun to be around, walking down the tracks and stuff like that, you know, and so.
Well, so you missed it when it left the Grand Meadow area, and in many parts of our state, they're now bike trails, but you reconstructed it here. Tell us more about the crowd and the people that do it.
The crowd is just happy to get on a train, I think, and right around close by, you know. They don't have to go to Colorado, and it's the younger kids like it probably more, but there's a lot of adults love to get on it too, and go over the bridges that we have here, and The little Cripple Creek that we got back there, and Boot Hill is out there, and there's a few wild animals out there, alligators and.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I saw you maintaining the rail when I first came in. What were you doing?
We were leveling the track on that one curve where over winter it sags and changes a little bit. So we were gandy dancing out there with some sticks and leveling the track off, and should be good to go now. So.
Will you take your railroad engine and cars to other shows?
Yes, we go to LeSueur, Minnesota, to their Pioneer Power up there at their thrashing show up there in August. We run for 2 days up there.
And some of those guys are here, perhaps?
Yes, there's 2 couples from LeSueur, and then there's 2 from Iowa that come and help also run the trains.
When that whistle goes like it just did, what's that do? What's going on inside your head when you hear the train whistle?
Well, the whistle means something. 2 beeps is they're going to take off. 1 beep is that they're stopped and the brake is on the engine, so you can get off then. And 3 beeps is back up. They're going to back up. So if you hear a 3 beep whistle, they're backing up. Everything means something, you know, when you're working on the railroad.
What really motivates you to do this, Jerry?
The people that you meet and talk to, and the thrill of just going down a track on a train that you don't have to steer.
Well, I'm enjoying this. The sights and sounds of trains behind me, the noises, seeing the beautiful trains go by, the smiles, the work you do, the shade, the nice track, and it's awesome. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you. And you're ready for a ride now?
I would love that.
All right.
Thank you, Jerry
Yeah,
Skifter.
thank you.
And thanks. Keep watching KSMQ Farm Connections. More next. That's awesome.
Passage of a new farm bill is very complex, with programs ranging from commodities to food and nutrition to conservation to rural development programs and many more. Many times, finalizing a farm bill in Congress can be quite controversial and not necessarily by political party lines. Today, we will look at conservation and nutrition programs that are contained in the farm bill. Land set-aside and conservation programs were added to farm bills in the 1950s with the establishment of the Soil Bank Program. While the Soil Bank Program no longer exists, there have been many other set-aside and conservation programs, including the popular Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP, which was added in the 1985 Farm Bill. The current Farm Bill reduced the maximum CRP acreage from 32 million acres to 24 million acres, which is at the lowest maximum level since the initiation of the CRP program. The CRP acreage is currently very near that maximum of 24 million acres, so only very selected environmentally sensitive crop acreage is being allowed into the program through the continuous CRP program. There will likely be strong efforts by some members of Congress as well as agricultural and environmental organizations to increase the maximum CRP acreage in the next Farm Bill. There are also several other conservation programs for farm operators and landowners that are part of the current Farm Bill and will need to be reauthorized in the next Farm Bill. Food stamps were added to the Farm Bill in 1973, mainly because the food stamp program is administered through USDA. About 80% of the funding in the current Farm Bill goes to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, which includes food stamps, the Women, Infants, and Children Program, or WIC, and the School Lunch Program. The federal budget outlay for SNAP programs more than doubled from 2008 to 2013 due to the economic downturn in the U.S., higher food costs, and an easing of eligibility requirements for food stamps. However, the federal spending on SNAP programs has decreased in recent years. The last Farm Bill was written in 2014 to cover federal fiscal years from 2014 to 2018. However, Congress has been known to extend farm bills beyond the expiration date, such as occurred with the last Farm Bill when it expired in 2012. The various Farm Bill programs can be quite geographical, with members of Congress wanting to protect the farm, food, conservation, and economic interests of their state or their congressional district. The very large federal budget deficit and the volatile national political landscape have added a new element to passage of a new Farm Bill. Ultimately, there will likely be a compromise reached, and a new 5-year Farm Bill will be passed by the end of 2018 or early 2019. That's all for today. We'll be back next time.
We're at the Event Bar and Grill in Casson, Minnesota with a representative from the Plant Pathology Department at the University of Minnesota, Dr. Dean Malvick. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
What does a plant pathologist do?
Plant pathologist works on managing and solving diseases of plants. And many people are actually surprised that plants have diseases, which kind of surprises me since I've worked on diseases for so long. But
You studied it for a long time and worked with it.
I have both here and in Illinois. Yes.
How long?
I've been working on diseases for about 22 years.
So that would probably make you an expert.
For some things, yes. But many things, as you get deeper in, the more you realize that you don't know.
That's a sign of a good researcher and a good person in agriculture, to learn and to try and do better. What do you do in plant pathology? What's an average day look like?
You know, it varies a lot, of course, from the winter versus the summer. I mainly work with the diseases of corn and soybeans. So, our active field season is the same as the growing season, which is, May through October, essentially. But in the wintertime, we do a lot of work in the greenhouses, and I travel around the state doing extension educational programs like the one we're here in Casson doing today. We were in Waseca yesterday, tomorrow we'll be in Lamberton, next week we'll be up in Morris and some other places. So that's one thing I do in the wintertime. And a lot of days, in addition, I manage graduate students that do some of the research, and we have a very active winter research program going on in greenhouses in the laboratory as well. And so those are some of the common things that I do in the wintertime. And in the summertime, it's a lot of field research, trying to get some answers of managing diseases in the field.
Has anything changed in plant pathology in those 22 years?
Techniques have changed a lot, and certainly varieties are changing all the time. And new diseases are coming on the scene all the time. So it's never dull, it's never boring. We still have the old diseases that have been with us for decades that are changing and still causing problems. And then we have new problems that come on the scene. So things are changing all the time in many ways.
plant breeding and varieties have sped up or accelerated the development of new varieties and new releases, how has that impacted plant diseases?
Well, in some cases, it's improved the level of disease resistance. It's improved the amount of disease resistance that's available. It's those are the two main things. It's improved the understanding of disease resistance, so breeding can even be faster in the future.
You've done some work with Phytophthora rot, for example.
Yes.
Tell us about that. That's a long-standing disease. Anything changing there?
Yes, so Phytophthora rot is a fungal-like disease that affects the roots and the stems of soybean. It can kill them throughout the season. So the main way the disease is controlled is through plant breeding. Plant breeders discovered a long time some major genes in the plant that control disease resistance. And they've worked quite well in most cases for the few decades. But now new types of the pathogen are coming and arising in fields, very much like new strains of viruses that cause flu in us. So we have to get immunized each year. Those strains can overcome some of the resistance. And that's one of the things I talked about today. Is some studies that were done recently in Minnesota looking at these strains and which ones overcome the resistance and which other genes that are out there that would be more effective. And so that's certainly changing. It's making the disease management more challenging.
You gave a great comparison. The flu strain, people get flu shots every year, and every year the flu strain is different. So how do we adapt and make agriculture feed us? How do we make plants do better?
You know, that's actually a very complicated question and answer because it involves many things, from soil fertility to insect management to disease management to better and improved agronomic practices. So there are a lot of things. You know, my angle on this is disease management and understanding the diseases and how to manage them. You know, one of the main things that we really struggle with is which diseases are causing problems. You know, if every grower, crop consultant, or homeowner, in the case of home garden diseases, were out scouting their plants at the optimal times to know which diseases were occurring for corn and soybean crops, that would probably be mid-August. We'd have a much better understanding of what problems are really reducing yields across the state and what we need to do to solve those. I got a question today about a particular corn disease. I know it's out there. We are not doing any extensive surveys to find out how widespread it is. So knowing what's out there is part of that problem and really understanding that.
So your recommendation is scouting and scouting early and often. What does a homeowner or a farmer do when they find a potential disease problem?
Yes. So to a non-expert, it's hard to identify a disease accurately. There are a few diseases that can be identified pretty easily once somebody has seen them, but that is the exception. Most cannot be. So an experienced crop consultant, for example, in corn and soybean production, many diseases can be diagnosed pretty readily by experienced crop consultants. Some diseases, they have to be sent into a diagnostic laboratory. University of Minnesota St. Paul has one of those. Many companies have their own diagnostic laboratories that their own agronomists send samples in for disease confirmation. So that laboratory component is a very important part of identifying diseases.
You talked a little bit about fertility, pest control, weeds. It sounds like an integrated pest management. Do you collaborate with others?
I do. I collaborate with entomologists and agronomists and weed scientists because it's really a whole systems approach to managing diseases and managing a crop and getting ultimate high yields.
What's the economic impact on farmers in our state and our region of plant diseases?
Okay, that varies a lot from year to year based on the weather. And most of the diseases that are important are really driven by our weather conditions. But the unfortunate thing is no matter what our weather conditions, it's favorable for some disease. So to try to assess the overall impact is really difficult because most diseases are patchy. Some farms get hit hard by a particular disease, can be 10, 20, 30% down in yields. Others a few miles away may not suffer any damage. So the overall impact is hard to assess, but for some growers in some years it's substantial, whereas other years it's negligible.
Have you noticed any new diseases, and if you have, should we be concerned?
Yeah, I'll start back a few years. First of all, there's a new disease that came into Minnesota in 2010 called Goss's wilt of corn, a bacterial disease. It's been pretty significant across the state. And seed companies and others have really worked to develop new hybrids and other ways to manage that disease. There's one example. It's been here a few years. This year, 2016, there's another brand new disease of corn confirmed for the first time in Minnesota, another bacterial disease called bacterial leaf streak. It was confirmed in Nebraska, first of all. Based on that, some survey work was done. It was found in 2 counties in Minnesota. So we don't know the extent or potential for that to cause damage, but it's brand new, and we'll be looking a lot more for that one in 2017.
What tools do farmers have to combat plant diseases and make things go better?
Well, there are a lot of things that farmers do just as using good agronomic practices. Crop rotation, tillage where appropriate. Those have been 2 long-standing things that not only generally help crops grow better, but also are an important part of any disease management program. The other one is disease-resistant hybrids and varieties. And the seed companies have worked diligently on this and made major investments in developing varieties of soybean and hybrids of corn that have disease resistance. In many cases, that's enough to keep diseases in check. In some cases, even our best technologies cannot develop resistance that works really well. Sometimes we have seed treatments or fungicides are appropriate. So it really depends on the disease and the situation. So farmers have a number of tools. But again, I'll come back to a point we discussed earlier, was diagnosing the disease and knowing for sure what we're dealing with is really a key element of any disease management strategy.
And Doctor, how do farmers learn more?
There are many sources of information. University of Minnesota, we have websites devoted to crop disease management and to horticulture disease management with some colleagues that are developing. The North Central Soybean Research Program invests substantial amounts of funding in soybean, for example, research, and there's an excellent website they have. There's a lot of information on our websites. We have printed publications, we have books. So there's a lot of different ways information can be obtained. And, searches on the internet will yield multiple opportunities to get that information.
Very necessary.
Yes.
And thank you so much for the interview today. We appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Stay tuned for more on Farm Connections.
Telling the story of agriculture to consumers has been an important mission for most farm groups over the years. But an organization called Common Ground is trying to take it a step further. They are inviting what many call foodies, writers, bloggers, and others on social media that talk and write about food, to a dinner experience on a working farm.
Events like this tonight, farm dinner events, are just one way that consumers have an opportunity to come out to a farm, talk with farmers, see a farm, tour a farm, and really just learn more about where their food comes from firsthand.
An event that is part of the Field to Fork Dinner Series was held recently near Dundas, Minnesota, on a dairy farm. Organizer Megan Doyle explains.
We are at Wolf Creek Dairy, just outside of Dundas, and tonight guests are going to have the opportunity to take a tour of the dairy, see the milking parlor, see the calves, see the cows, see some equipment, both modern and equipment from 40 years ago. So it's an interesting comparison to see how the technology has changed over the years and the advancements that have been made in agriculture. But really the important part of tonight is seeing the farm and meeting and talking with farmers.
The Minnesota Corn Growers has education as one of their major objectives. Executive Director Adam Burr says this effort fits perfectly.
We've all seen the statistics of third and fourth generation removed from the farm, and so we're trying to bridge that gap so people at least understand, have a forum to ask questions that they have about some of the issues that are around there around food, and create a nice environment to do so.
An experience on the farm can yield excellent results for agriculture because it can lead to greater understanding about what farmers do and how sustainable they really are. In a day and age of social media, bloggers, and a renewed interest in food and local food, organizations like Common Ground and the Minnesota Corn Growers see a real opportunity to bring people from cities who have not been on a farm and tell the story of agriculture. This is Lynn Kettleson reporting.
As the world around us continues to change and notions of community are constantly redefined, it's important for us to remember how we got to where we are and who helped us along the way. I'm Dan Hoffman. Thank you for joining us on Farm Connections.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.